Welcome to Evidence Base, a new Harbinger psychology podcast. I'm your host, Cassie Stossel. On today's episode, we're talking about body-based activities to regulate and rewire your nervous system after trauma with Dr. Arielle Schwartz, author of the Polyvagal Theory Workbook for Trauma. Arielle is a licensed clinical psychologist, certified complex trauma professional, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing consultant, and Kripalu yoga teacher. She's an internationally sought out speaker, leading voice in the field of trauma recovery, and award winning author. As a faculty member at the Polyvagal Institute, she is a course instructor on mind body approaches that apply polyvagal theory for trauma recovery. She earned her doctorate in clinical psychology at Fielding Graduate University and holds a master's degree in somatic psychology through Naropa University. She is author of 7 books, including the Complex PTSD Workbook, EMDR Therapy and Somatic Psychology, and the Post-Traumatic Growth Guidebook. Hi, Arielle. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
I'm so looking forward to this conversation. I've been very interested in polyvagal theory, and I know a lot more people are catching on to this amazing work. So, can you talk about what polyvagal theory is and why it's known as the science of safety?
Yes, I'm happy to talk about this. I first learned about the polyvagal theory about 20 years ago, and I was making my way through some very complex scientific papers about this. But basically, what polyvagal theory is, if we break down the word polyvagal, poly means multiple, and vagal is referring to the vagus nerve, which is our 10th cranial nerve. And the vagus nerve is different than some of the other cranial nerves because it extends throughout our bodies. And what's special about our vagus nerve is that it helps our brains do an optimal job taking care of our bodies. So it's considered to be this mind body superhighway of connection, helping to bring information about our digestive system and our heartbeat and our blood pressure and our respiratory rate. And it brings all of that information up to the brain, and the brain gathers that information, especially the brainstem, and says, okay, we need to lower the blood pressure, we need to increase the heart rate, maybe we need to increase the respiratory rate or slow it down, or this is a great time to rest and digest. And we really need that connection to be awake and optimally functioning for all of our kind of health systems, mental, emotional health, as well as physical health, to be optimized. And polyvagal refers to what we call this paradox that we see within our nervous system, that sometimes when we engage the parasympathetic nervous system, which is often considered to be our rest and digest system, sometimes we go into rest, but sometimes it's more like we kind of fall off the cliff into feelings of shutdown and fatigue and exhaustion, or an urge to get small or hide, or maybe we get a little nauseous or dizzy, or our digestion is off. And so this is referred to as the parasympathetic paradox. And for our listeners that aren't so familiar with the autonomic nervous system, we have 2 branches: our sympathetic, which is our go system, it's like the gas pedal, and that parasympathetic system, which is our rest system or our stop system. And so this stop system sometimes is restorative and sometimes leads us to feel pretty exhausted or shut down or to literally faint. And so to understand why these 2 expressions of the parasympathetic system can show up, we have to understand that the vagus nerve is always going to initiate a parasympathetic response. However, sometimes it's that soft, slow brake system, and sometimes it's a hard shutdown. And so looking at that, Dr. Stephen Porges, who developed the polyvagal theory, really looked at the fact that he kind of describes these 2 primary circuits of the vagus nerve: an upper circuit that's newer from an evolutionary perspective, that helps us downregulate out of that sympathetic fight flight for the sake of connection and orienting to safety and allowing that restful state. And then we have an evolutionarily older circuit of the vagus nerve that takes us more into that hard, fast shutdown for survival purposes. You think about the possum, or, any animal that goes into some kind of shut down, feigned death response. And as humans, we have a version of that as well.
Yeah, and with your new book, we're applying polyvagal theory to trauma recovery specifically. And what are some common roadblocks that you see with folks who are suffering from trauma? What are barriers to that recovery for them?
Yeah. I think one of the biggest barriers that we see is an experience of isolation, right? That there's some way or another in which we withdraw and we get caught in that withdrawal from the world, and we don't really know a path forward. We don't know that there's actually a way that we can reorient towards some experiences of safety and connection, and that in that process it puts us back in the driver's seat of our own nervous system. I think along these same lines, like it's helpful. One of the reasons why I've written books for the layperson, for the client for many years, is that I really love to guide people through a healing journey. It's been so valuable to be that voice, a trustworthy voice, and someone can pick up that book and feel less alone. And what's also really striking about this book and the partnership with New Harbinger is that there's several of those practices that I'm guiding you through where you can click on the URL and it's my voice leading them through a practice. And so it's very interactive in that sense. But the other part of it is that I think so often we feel like we have to get in there and unpack all of the memories in order to heal from trauma. And a lot of the trauma recovery models out there are memory focused models. And what this book does is it's not to say we're going to deny or ignore those pain points or the traumas of the past, but we have a whole foundation of safety that we can build into the felt sense in the nervous system and the body, and turning towards our emotions with compassion, that we can build that foundation first so that there's this really strong sense of solid ground underneath an individual, so that by the time perhaps they're turning towards those pain points of the past, they don't feel swallowed or overwhelmed as they turn towards traumatic memories.
Yeah, I really appreciate this approach just on a personal level. I was sort of engaging in some polyvagal activities when I was going through cancer treatment without realizing what I was doing. Like ice pack to the chest was like a go-to like on a daily basis, and now that I've read more work on polyvagal theory, I realize, what I was doing in that moment. And so I appreciate that it's very body based. And I know for me, a lot of my anxiety or trauma comes in the form of body sensations more than it is in the mental space. So I think this foundation is just such a huge factor in healing. And so I'm really glad that, we have your work on this topic for these folks. And I want to get into PTSD a little bit. And can you talk about how it affects our sensory processing?
Yeah. I came across an article about 4 years ago that was a research piece about the intersection between trauma and our sensory systems, and it really lit me up because it explains a lot of the symptoms that we commonly see with trauma. And basically, when we think of our sensory systems, we can think of our 5 senses, what we see, taste, touch, smell, hear. And we also have our interoceptive sensory system of how we feel inside our body: hot, cold, hungry, thirsty, pain, discomfort, pleasure. And also that internal felt sense of the body helps us know when we're having an emotion. And we also have our proprioception, kind of where am I in space and how much space am I taking up and how do I coordinate my body and can I balance and so forth. And those three systems work together with our nervous system, with our vagus nerve, to help us basically sense, am I safe? Are there threats out there? Is there danger? And our nervous system is picking up on those cues without us even realizing it. The way that trauma interacts with our sensory processing is that sometimes we get caught in hypervigilance. We're kind of familiar with that term in PTSD, and all of those senses get heightened. Now suddenly all of the sounds feel like they're bombarding. I'm highly sensitive to smells or to touch, or I feel bombarded by the sensations in my body. I'm highly sensitive to any discomfort. It feels extremely painful or intolerable. And sometimes we see the opposite pattern where rather than being hyper vigilant to our senses, one of the ways that we cope, especially with ongoing early developmental trauma, is that we dial down our sensory processing. And in this case, we feel less, we're less sensorially aware. And the consequences of that is that we might not pick up on the cues that let us know that there's a danger out there. Or we might have more difficulty coordinating our body in space. We might feel more accident prone or clumsy. And what I've appreciated more than anything about the integration of polyvagal theory into trauma recovery is that it provides a depth of compassion for our symptoms. We can really see that, wow, there's a reason why I'm bumping into things, or there's a reason why I'm getting involved in relationships and I'm missing those cues that let me know that this person is actually not that kind or not going to take care of me in a loving way because I've tuned out of that sensory feedback that is actually necessary to help me navigate the world. And if I'm in the opposite pattern, if I'm overwhelmed and taking in too much sensory input, sometimes we see that individuals are reacting as if everything's a threat when some things aren't actually a threat for us, right? I use the metaphor of like the fire alarms going off in a house where there's no fire, right? But it feels as if there's all of that threat. So as we learn to turn towards our senses and be with the body, we actually can balance out either the overwhelm or the underwhelm, if we think about it that way, of that sensory processing.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And when we're talking about PTSD, you also do a lot of work in the CPTSD arena. Can you talk about the difference between these two? And is the polyvagal approach the same for both?
Yeah, it's a great question that kind of piggybacks on what we were just speaking about, because very often when we look at classic PTSD, which is generally associated more with like single incident trauma or traumas that at least are short living, that it might be a few weeks, but that there's an endpoint to them. And our nervous systems tend to be more in that hyper arousal domain where we're in more sympathetic activation, we have more vigilance, we're more prone to re-experiencing symptoms of, nightmares or flashbacks in some way or another. And CPTSD or complex trauma is it develops in response to the ongoing accumulation of events from which there is no escape. And it's much more likely in that experience to have had to dial down that sensory input in order to basically survive. Like, I can't allow all of that incoming experience of threat to be registered consciously by my mind because I'll never go out into the world. I'll never engage with another person. And especially when this begins in childhood, one of the dilemmas is I still have to attach to a person that's my primary caretaker, my parent. But if that person is also a source of threat, it causes a very core fragmentation inside of an individual where, in order to keep that attachment system up and running, I have to dissociate from the cues of threat coming from their voice tone, their facial expressions, their body language, or how they're harming me. And so we tend to see more dissociation symptoms with CPTSD and emotional dysregulation, interpersonal challenges, and difficulties with kind of self identity.
Yeah, do you find that those with that complex trauma maybe take longer to seek help because they keep shutting off, sort of all those warnings in their system?
Sometimes, right? I think that we can see with CPTSD both sides, right? Those that are kind of highly functioning, very often very smart, really able and capable of getting things done in the world. But there's inside much more of a, sometimes we call it a functional freeze, or basically a way in which I've had to contain or shut down or dissociate from the trauma that, in a sense, my body and my nervous system knows. And then sometimes an event happens in life. Maybe it's a car accident, maybe it's, some other acute trauma. And through the gates of that acute recent event, suddenly they're confronted with the underlying material that they had pushed away for so long. And then sometimes we see that with CPTSD, there actually is so much ongoing emotional dysregulation and challenges in relationships that rather than being shut down from that sensory experience, the flooding is still more predominant.
Yeah, that makes sense. And one concept you talk about cultivating nervous system awareness. Can you talk about what that is and how we might start to cultivate that awareness?
Yeah. So I already mentioned that our nervous systems are working on our behalf to keep us safe. And doing so, your nervous system is going to, it's called neuroception in the language of polyvagal theory, but neuroception simply means that your nervous system is going to gather all of those cues from what's happening in your body or what your five senses are sensing out there and is going to communicate that up to your brain, and you don't even have to consciously be aware of it, right? It's going to happen on your behalf. It's happening to keep you safe. The problem that begins to happen is that we might go into defensive states, fight, flight, or a little bit of shutdown, and we might not be aware of it because we are not consciously sensing the state of the nervous system. And how do we sense the state of the nervous system? It is actually about building that sensory awareness of your body, of your emotions, of what you're sensing and feeling inside. It's going to let you know, wow, I didn't realize how tense I was. I didn't realize that my jaw was gripping or that I was breathing shallowly or I was breathing up in only into my upper chest, right? And so as we build body centered awareness, as we build sensory awareness of the body, we're also simultaneously beginning to wake up to the state of our nervous system.
You were just talking about sort of that tensing your shoulders, and, like, I always see those, like, when I'm scrolling on social media, it's like, "Unclench your jaw," and then you don't realize you are doing it, and I always feel attacked. I'm like, "Oh my gosh, I was clenching." So that's so interesting that your body is doing it without your cognitive awareness of it.
Yes, it's so true, and it's just the nature of us as humans is that we can only hold so much conscious awareness at any given time of our experience, and in some ways, it's very intelligent that we can allow a lot of things just to run in the background so that I can, drive to work and also plan my day or something like that. But on the other hand, the unfortunate side of it is that we might not realize the ways in which our bodies are carrying tension that are actually contributing to some significant imbalances in our well-being.
Yeah, absolutely. And when we're talking about polyvagal theory, what role does connection play?
Mm. I think it's the perhaps most paramount element of the applied polyvagal theory model because we're recognizing that connection is a biological imperative. We are wired for connection and we're wired by connection. When I say wired, what I really mean is that our nervous systems deeply benefit from opportunities to be in safe connection with other people, and safe is a really loaded word in today's world, right? Like, I've certainly worked with many people that say, like, "I never feel safe in the world," and sometimes we have to kind of tone that down to what is safe enough right now, or is there any time, place, person? It doesn't even always have to be a connection with another person because sometimes people have been so profoundly unsafe. A connection to a loving pet, a connection in nature, right? A connection to a spiritual presence in your life or a practice. And that as we cultivate that deep sense of belonging, a deep sense of we are welcome as we are. And perhaps indeed we have an opportunity, a blessed opportunity to experience that with another person, our bodies will receive that as well. And something begins to shift inside of us where even without us having to think about it, our jaw softens, our shoulders release, our gut responds with, it's okay to rest. I can actually digest my food now. And when we can cultivate those mindfully and gather that, and even if we can't get it from another person, quite yet, maybe we can practice giving that to ourselves, what we would call more self-compassion.
Yeah, I love that. And one thing, my husband, he also works in mental health, and we both work from home. So anytime we're having a particularly stressful day, we'll just sort of like meet in the hall and hug, and like both of us will feel like that calming sensation. So that connection piece is so important. And I love that, we can have those conversations and know what's happening when we're hugging. Like I think that's really cool.
Yeah, that's a beautiful opportunity for you both.
We'll be right back after this short break.
Hello, I'm Dr. Matthew McKay, creator of Therapy Assist. We've designed Therapy Assist to be an accessible and efficient platform. By providing a library of thousands of resources and the ability to customize workbooks, we're putting evidence-based tools in your hand, helping to improve client outcomes. Research consistently shows that between session homework can significantly improve client outcomes and reduce dropout. But finding the right tools to assign can be time-consuming. Therapy Assist makes this process faster and easier. You can search through a library of curated resources, including psychoeducation, worksheets, exercises, meditations, and much more. You can use these resources both during your sessions and as homework assignments for clients, all with the confidence that they are rooted in evidence-based therapies. Therapy Assist's resource library is built on the firm foundation of New Harbinger Publications' 50-plus years of pioneering work in self-help and psychology. So you'll have resources created by world-renowned psychologists and researchers right at your fingertips. Our platform makes it easy for you to find exactly what you need with search filters and curated protocols. These comprehensive tools provide you with the ability to search for a resource by any combination of therapy type, presenting problem, transdiagnostic mechanism, intervention, or resource type. Therapy Assist helps you support more clients between sessions in less time. I know therapists often spend hours searching through files, books, or online to find the resources they need. Therapy Assist takes care of this for you, saving you valuable time you can use to focus on what matters most, helping your clients heal and thrive. With Therapy Assist, you can also review completed resources ahead of time, which means you'll be fully prepared for each session, ready to make the most of your time with your client. We understand the importance of having access to the most effective client resources in your work, and we're committed to continuously updating our library to keep pace with the latest research and cutting-edge tools in the field. Your clients' privacy and security are top priorities for us. Therapy Assist is fully HIPAA compliant, so you can trust that the data entered is kept safe and confidential. To start your free trial and find out how Therapy Assist can transform your practice, go to therapyassist.com. We're here to support you every step of the way.
Okay, so I mentioned my favorite way to stimulate my vagus nerve is ice and cold, but I was hoping you could talk about some other ways that you can stimulate your vagus nerve and how these tools can help sort of build that resilience for us.
Yes. So I actually want to start with the cold exposure. And I love that you also named that not only is it beneficial for trauma recovery, but as you were bringing that in the midst of cancer treatment and finding that so beneficial. And it's such a powerful process. And it doesn't always mean that we have to jump into like a total ice bath for it to be effective. Right. I personally also love the cold pack and on the chest or the sides of my neck or my forehead or scalp, it feels like such a blessing. And part of why vagal stimulation or natural vagus nerve stimulation works is because there are certain areas of your body where your vagus nerve comes very close to the surface of your skin, sides of your neck, in your ears, on your face, upper chest. And so we can also work with self applied touch to create very gentle stimulation of the vagus nerve. And I think so often we hear in the world out there like biohacking and, hack the vagus nerve. And more often what I say is what we're doing is we're creating really gentle pathways in where we can regulate our system. And why does stimulating the upper vagus, whether that's through, touch or an ear massage, right? These simple things, why does that work? That upper vagal pathway is our regulating system. It is very much about helping us come out of those states of fight flight, but also coming into what we'll call this kind of optimal zone where it's, sometimes we can think of it as the Goldilocks principle, right? I'm not too hot, I'm not too cold, it's just right. And it allows us to both feel a little bit more awake and stimulated, meaning like I'm alert, I feel ready to meet the world. An ice pack can be enlivening, but it also helps us come down into states of more safety or more ease if we are already keyed up in that too hot zone. So it's about knowing your nervous system, know what nervous system state am I in? Am I keyed up? Am I shut down? And then I can use vagus nerve stimulation to upregulate or downregulate as needed.
Mhm. Like I said, I didn't know necessarily what I was doing when I was engaging in that, but I know it was calming my body. But I also found that when exposed to cold, my brain wasn't doing its loop of negative thinking or, sort of those self-critical thoughts. And so it also sort of shuts off that area as well at the same time, which is fascinating and wonderful to discover.
Yeah, profound, actually, really profound. To know how to get out of that worst case scenario thinking is such a gift.
Yeah, and as we're talking about, you mentioned earlier one of maybe the automatic systems like the shallow breathing, for example, or breathing from your chest and not lower. But what can we notice in as a relationship between our emotions and our breathing? Like, how do they interconnect?
I have a whole chapter in the Polyvagal workbook for trauma book that is very much focused on that breath body emotions connection because it is so central. One of the things that Dr. Stephen Porges says is that breath is the fastest way to regulate the autonomic nervous system. And what I love about recognizing that role of the breath is that we see that every inhalation actually upregulates our system a little bit. It keys in a little bit of our sympathetic nervous system, and every exhalation does the opposite. It brings us into a little bit more of a parasympathetic state. So when we breathe rhythmically, we are cultivating nervous system balance. And if I notice, hey, I'm keyed up, I'm anxious, we can use the breath and follow a long, slow exhale to downregulate into more of a relaxation response. Conversely, if I'm feeling fatigued, shut down, low energy, I can emphasize my inhalation and I can bring in a little bit more of a state of aliveness. And it's so simple and it's a really easy equation to remember. Like, oh, I can sit in that driver's seat of my nervous system. One more thing that I'll name about the breath that I think is really powerful, and I speak about this in the book, is that we can really look at the connection between the fascia of our body or the connective tissue, which is so intertwined with our vagus nerve and our nervous system, and we have certain ways in which we carry kind of blockages or kind of tightness in the fascia and in the muscles of the body that are very connected to our breathing. And that would be in the diaphragm, that would be in some of the intercostals of our lungs that allow the lungs to expand. That would be all the way down into the psoas, which are often considered to be our fight flight muscles that live down into the low belly and connect to the upper legs through the pelvis. So, kind of building more awareness of your breathing anatomy and then being able to do some gentle movements that help to stretch and open up so that we can free up our natural breathing patterns. actually, when we're not carrying all of that tension in the diaphragm or in the psoas, our breath is freed up to take that deep, full, satisfying breath.
Yeah, I've been working through this a little bit myself because leading up to my cancer diagnosis, my only symptom was trouble breathing. I had a tumor pressing against my trachea, so I kept getting misdiagnosed with asthma. So I've been working through my own experience with focusing on breath because I at first I found that triggering, like to be too in tune with how I was breathing. And so like I was looking at some of the types of breathing that you offer in the book to sort of try to not expose myself to that, but to try to like trust in my own breath again. But it's always interesting because I feel like I have a lot of these great conversations where we want to bring it back to the breath. And for me, that was just a really sore point for a long time. So I'm still working my way out of that and trying to trust in that breath again, which has been interesting.
Yeah, it's a really powerful example that you give, and it's one of the more common responses, or maybe like, oh no, I don't want to bring awareness to my breath because as soon as I do, I feel anxious again. And so I love that you said like, oh, there are many different paths to becoming consciously aware of the breath, and it doesn't always, they don't all have to bring up that feeling of that automatic association of the, well, I'll call it kind of the trauma memory of the time in which that pressure was there. And your body has a felt sense association of difficulty breathing actually being a threat response from the inside out that was trying to, the symptom was basically trying to say, listen to me, right? There's something wrong in here, which is so smart.
Yeah, and that deep belly breathing, like the difference between that, because I was breathing shallowly for so long that when I like actually think about breathing deeper, it's less triggering because, I'm not doing those shallow breaths. It's really that relationship is very interesting. One concept I found super interesting is the vagal break. I was wondering if you could talk about that and how our heart rate variability plays into that.
Yes. So the vagal brake is a core concept of the polyvagal theory that looks at the vagus nerve as a kind of metaphorical and in some ways an actual brake system on the gas pedal of the sympathetic nervous system. So we can think once again of that sympathetic nervous system as the go, go, go system. It's our mobilizing system. It moves us through the world. And we have within the sinoatrial node of the heart or the heart's pacemaker a meeting place in which the vagus nerve and its two branches, its two circuits, and the sympathetic nervous system, they all meet right in that location of the heart. And ideally, we have what we would call a smooth braking system. That's that ventral vagal circuit in which we can apply the vagal brake and it's going to slow everything down, but not a hard, fast stop. It allows us to take a nice, smooth slowing down. And if you, again, imagine driving a car, if you were to lift your foot off the brake, it naturally accelerates, right? You don't even have to step on the gas yet for the car to start moving. And then you can add a little bit more gas as you go. And so we can imagine this cultivation of a smooth drive, right? Where you're not, you know, not slamming on the gas and not slamming on the brakes, but we have this soft, smooth that is facilitated by the ventral vagal circuit that allows for this very smooth ride. And we cultivate what we call vagal tone. Vagal tone is measured by heart rate variability. And heart rate variability is the measure of the number of heartbeats that you're having and the intervals between them in relationship to your breath. So, for example, if every breath is keying in a little bit of sympathetic nervous system, you're going to get more heartbeats on your inhalation pattern. And every exhalation, we're going to get a little more parasympathetic, and your heart rate's going to slow down. You'll have a wider interval between those heartbeats. And a measure of our well-being, our health, our vagal tone, all of these ways of saying it is that we have this rhythmic relationship between the increase of heartbeats on the inhalation and the decrease of heartbeats on your exhalation. And that when we breathe rhythmically for, let's say, 3 minutes, it doesn't even have to take that long. We are actually building in this rhythmic, coherent rhythm into your nervous system, into your breath, your heart rate. It's a beautiful communication between body and brain that basically says everything is okay. Everything is okay, and our minds think clearer. We're more capable of handling stress. We are able to be more creative and problem solving and handle conflicts. There's so much beautiful research around that high heart rate variability rhythm.
Yeah, I recently read a bit about that because I have an aura ring, and like during a time of stress, like every day it was like your heart rate variability has lowered. And so I found that interesting. And when I read about it, like the fact that so many people's are different, like there's not like a normal rate, but tracking like when yours is lower immediately correlates to that stressful time, which is so interesting.
Yeah, I also wear a wearable device that tracks my heart rate variability, and I had a very stressful time at the end of last year, beginning of this year, and then I had an opportunity to go travel to Costa Rica for 2 weeks, and it kind of in the opposite, I noticed that my heart rate variability increased by 20 points. I was like, "Wow, that's fascinating." Like, I really did relax.
Yeah, it's so interesting. Yeah. I love that we all can like track ours as well and and notice when it does correlate.
Yeah, and a lot of these wearable devices, mine is built into my Garmin watch that I wear, and but they'll also when you're kind of tracking your stress level or tracking your HRV, they have cueings for breathing exercises. So, the same thing with the apps on our phones that are going to track our heart rate variability. They'll usually guide a 3 to 5 minute rhythmic breathing practice because it's known to cultivate that greater HRV.
Yeah, absolutely. And one other concept I really loved in the book was the idea of the divided brain. Can you talk more about that? And what are some tools to sort of integrate these hemispheres of our brain?
Yeah. So the hemispheric differentiation, if I use a fancy term there, between left and right hemispheres of the brain, it was something that was very predominant for a while in the kind of neuroscience literature, and then it got a little bit debunked. It got kind of pushed aside of like, no, I know that there's not that much differentiation. Our brains are really intelligent, and because of neuroplasticity, other parts of the brain can kind of take over functioning, and it's not that distinct. And then there was another researcher that came forth that said, actually, let's take a closer look at this differential brain functioning. And he brought it right back to the surface and really started to identify that actually there are some very different hemispheric distinctions. And it's not what we always thought. I think we always thought right hemisphere is more emotional and left hemisphere is more verbal. And it's not quite that. What he distinguished is that our right hemisphere is very capable of seeing the big picture. In fact, it gathers so much data that if we were only living in our right brains all of the time, it would be like a constant psychedelic trip. Like it would be so much information coming in that our left brains actually function like a filter system. And we want to be able to filter by how much is really necessary for us to pay attention to in any given moment. But here's the problem. So many of us, and we'll talk a little bit about trauma and how it kind of maximizes on this divided brain, but so often we end up being a little too left brain dominant, where we can only see what's right in front of us, and it's very analytical and it's going to pay attention to the details, and we lose that big picture felt experience or the gestalt. One of my favorite reference points for this if we're only looking at, let's say, a painting through the left brain, we're going to analyze the brush stroke and the use of color and the placement of items in the painting and the angles and the lines, but we lose a sense of how that painting makes us feel when we gaze at it. And how it really communicates an overall felt experience. Now, if we look at another person only through the left brain, we become kind of more critical, more analytical. We're breaking down. We're kind of saying, well, why did you say it that way? And we lose that emotional connection with each other. When we only look at ourselves with our left brain, we can be more self-critical. We can focus more on the, kind of wanting to fix little parts of ourselves, and we can get fixated if we think about it that way. So we want to be able to have access to both ways of being with ourselves, each other, the world. And what trauma does is it basically, if all of that overall gestalt, that big picture felt experience of our let's say our family of origin or growing up in the world had so many threats, had so much danger associated with it, it makes sense to push away that right brain processing, that right brain feeling into the world, and to become more left brain analytical, intellectual. It protects us from feeling the threat, but then we get stuck. So the practices that I offer in the book and in my work in the world are very much about how do we enhance the communications and the connectivity across both sides of the brain? And there's a few ways that we do this. And I've been trained in EMDR therapy for many, many years. I trained in that in 2001, and so about 24 years at this stage. And we can recognize that there are quite a few therapeutic modalities that emphasize some form of bilateral stimulation, whether it's eye movements or tapping or sounds that help us to kind of integrate between left and right sides of the body and left and right sides of the brain. But I would almost emphasize another piece even more, which is that one of the ways where we're really building this connectivity is by being able to orient to how I'm feeling, pay attention to the sensations in my body, and be able to articulate with words what those feelings are and come back to the felt experience. And that as we're moving between words and feelings, we're actually doing brain integration.
Yeah. Oh, this concept is so interesting because I feel like once people started thinking like I'm either right brained or left brain, like that was a big part of like the zeitgeist to be like, I'm a creative person or I'm an analytical person. But the idea that you can reach that integration and have full access is really powerful. So I'm really glad that's like a big piece of this work. And Arielle, before we wrap up, I really want to ask about routines. Like I'm a big fan of routines, but I want to know sort of the underlying science, but for how these routines help us regulate.
Yeah. So our bodies are rhythmic creatures, right? And if you've ever raised a child or been a child, maybe you have some sense of it. One of my favorite examples of sensing into our rhythms is that, our sleep wake cycles, our digestive rhythms, when we're hungry, when we're thirsty, right? All of that has a kind of a built-in, not that it's universal for all of us as people, but we all kind of know, like, I this is my best time of day to exercise. This is when I get really sleepy. This is when I go for the cup of coffee. Maybe I could take a nap instead. If you've ever traveled, and maybe if you've traveled as a parent with a kid, like, how quickly those rhythms can get disrupted, right? Maybe your digestive system doesn't work as well as you travel. That certainly happens for me. Maybe your sleep or your child's sleep is thrown off because you're not in the same place and there's unfamiliarity. So trauma really disrupts these rhythms, right? When we've gone into some kind of shock, it's very common to lose your appetite, to not sleep well, to feel like all of those basic core rhythms that give us and that come on board when we feel safe, they go out the window. So we can work on trauma to restore these rhythms, but we can also work on restoring these rhythms to help give our body minds a felt sense of safe enough so that we can actually attend to the traumatic material. So I have a section towards the end of the book that really culminates with everything that you've practiced, the breathing practice and relaxation practices and mobilization or movement practices, vagal toning practices, and helps you create a daily rhythm that is optimized for you, that's personalized, so that you can actually build in those rhythms of regulation in a way that helps you care for yourself the same way that you would create those rhythms of regulation for a young child, right? Like, we're going to have nap time now, and now we're going to have our snack, right? We can treat ourselves so lovingly.
Yeah, I love that. And I love that all the tools you offer in this book are really accessible and you can fit them into those daily routines in a very like slotting them in is very simple. So I really appreciate that. And Arielle, did you have any final thoughts for our listeners before we say goodbye?
I just one more thought based on what you just shared, which is that sometimes it feels like, oh my gosh, I have to do all of these things to take care of myself. And what you just named is such a key piece, right? Like, it really can just be 3 minutes in the morning, right, of that breathing practice, or 5 minutes in the afternoon of that vagal toning practice. And those small things accumulate and make a huge difference in the overall regulation of our nervous systems. I'm just really grateful to be able to bring polyvagal theory in a way that doesn't feel like you're reading a scientific paper and you're getting lost in the, but that it feels really applicable.
Yeah, and you hear polyvagal theory and it's such this like big term. It feels like very scientific, but what you're offering, like I said, is very accessible and practical. So I really appreciate your work and thank you so much for this conversation. I really enjoyed it and I got a lot from reading your book and I learned a lot about myself of things I was engaging in without realizing what I was doing. So it gave me like the why behind it, which I love. So thank you again.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Rewire your nervous system for lasting calm, connection, and resilience with cutting edge polyvagal theory based activities. Whether you've suffered a single traumatic experience or faced repeated difficult life events, you can be left feeling hypervigilant, irritable, and disconnected. Daily tasks like attending a work meeting or social gathering can feel overwhelming or even frightening. Most therapies for treating trauma require you to revisit your traumatic experience in potentially triggering ways. In this cutting edge workbook, bestselling author and trauma expert Arielle Schwartz provides a practical body based method to help you treat your trauma symptoms without reliving your trauma or being exposed to triggers. The Polyvagal Theory Workbook for Trauma offers evidence based activities to help you heal the effects of trauma, rewire your nervous system, and return to a state of balance and calm. You'll begin by getting to know your nervous system, including an exploration of polyvagal theory and the vagus nerve. You'll also learn soothing body based practices to help you rewire your nervous response, including rhythmic movements with EMDR and tapping, conscious breathing, mindful movement, and more. Self reflection and journaling prompts will help you get the most out of every chapter, and a comprehensive collection of tools will help you stay on the path to trauma recovery. You don't have to relive your trauma in order to heal. With this powerful workbook, you can take charge of your mental health, build resilience, and feel safer and more connected. Visit our website at www.newharbinger.com and use coupon code podcast25 to receive 25% off your entire order. New Harbinger Publications is an independent, employee owned publisher of books on psychology, health, spirituality, and personal growth. For over 50 years, our evidence based self help books and pioneering workbooks have helped readers make positive changes to improve mental health and well being. Founded by psychologists Matthew McKay and Patrick Fanning, New Harbinger is proud to be an employee owned company. Our books reflect our core values of integrity, sustainability, compassion, and trust. Written by leaders in the field and recommended by therapists worldwide, New Harbinger books are practical, accessible, and provide real tools for real change. Join the New Harbinger Clinicians Club, a free membership club exclusively for mental health professionals. Sign up today and you'll receive a special welcome gift, 35% off all professional books, free client resources, free ebooks throughout the year, access to private sales, a subscription to our Quick Tips for Therapists email program, and more. Visit newharbinger.com/clinicians-club for more information. Do you have an idea for another episode? Do you want to send us a message? Our email address is podcast@newharbinger.com. We'd love to hear from you. This podcast was edited by Jesse Fancushion. If you enjoyed today's episode, we'd love if you rated, reviewed, and subscribed to the show, and we hope that you might share it with anyone who could benefit from the content. This podcast is not a substitute for counseling with a licensed provider.